Cherry used to love reading romantic fantasy books, especially ones with magic and danger. But one day, she died in a strange accident. The next thing she knew, she woke up in the world of one of her favorite novels. In this new life, she wasn't the main character. Instead, she was a side character with soft pink hair and a peaceful life. The real main character was a rich and elegant young lady who had everything she could want. Cherry, now known as Cherry Sinclair, was living in comfort. But that changed in an instant. One morning, as she was about to step into her carriage, she slipped and hit her head. That small accident brought back all her memories from her past life. She remembered reading a story about a world filled with terrifying monsters. In that world, people had to fight to survive. It wasn't a great book, but now it felt all too real. The first time Cherry saw a monster, fear shot through her, but she didn't run. She picked up an axe lying nearby and fought it off. She didn't feel regret, she only cared about staying alive. After that, she made a plan. Cherry started building a shelter and collecting supplies. She knew she might not be able to save everyone, but she was determined to protect her family and the people she cared about. Things were going well, until her older brother from this world came to visit. Then, by chance, she ran into another male character from the novel. Cherry wanted a quiet life, but meeting the key characters from the book made that impossible. Soon, she even met the real heroine of the story. Watching them argue, Cherry began to wonder if she could really stay out of trouble. The peaceful village was no longer safe. Monsters had arrived, and people were screaming and running for their lives. Just yesterday, there had been a cheerful fair in town. Now, blood stained her shoes. Cherry sat on the ground, shocked by the chaos around her. She knew what would happen next. If someone was bitten, they'd turn into a monster too. And it wouldn't stop. But Cherry wasn't the type to give up. She stood, grabbed her axe again, and faced the creatures head-on. Her clothes were soaked in blood, but she didn't care. She had to survive. Just a few weeks ago, life had been completely different. Cherry had been a social butterfly. The noble ladies gossiped about her spending habits and admired her beauty. She wasn't born into a noble family, but her charm and wealth made her popular. One day, while shopping, her maid asked her to stop buying so many things because the carriage was full. Cherry noticed the maid struggling with the heavy bags. Without thinking, she lifted them herself, surprising her maid with her strength. Cherry had always been strong, but she kept it a secret. When she was a child, she had been very sick. Her parents tried everything to help her, and after years of care, not only did she recover, she became stronger than most people. That day, just as she was about to climb into the carriage, she felt lightheaded. Her maid asked if she was all right, and Cherry smiled, saying it was nothing. But then, her foot slipped and she fell, hitting her head. Everything changed after that fall. Her head throbbed with pain, and images from her past life rushed in like a flood. When she finally opened her eyes, her maid was beside her, saying the doctor recommended rest. But Cherry knew the truth. This wasn't just a concussion. She had remembered who she really was, and now, she had to survive in a world that was falling apart. After waking up from her fall, Cherry told her maid she was fine and that there was no need to call a doctor. She just wanted to rest. Cherry asked the maid to bring her all the newspapers in the house. Once she was alone, she finally let her tears fall. Her memories had returned fully now, memories of a book she read in her past life. It was called Love in the World of the Apocalypse, a low-rated romance set during the end of the world. The main character, Aurora, was trying to find a cure for a spreading poison and teamed up with several love interests to survive and search for a solution. Survivors in the story built shelters, and their power depended on the size of their territory. Cherry remembered that she wasn't an important character in the book. In fact, she was supposed to die early on, just a background character who would become a monster. Even though she had been given another chance at life, it still felt like her fate was to die again. In her previous life, she had been hit by a car. Not a great ending. And now, here she was again, possibly walking toward another tragic fate. But this time, Cherry wasn't going to accept it. She needed a plan. She flipped through the newspapers the maid brought. Some articles were already reporting strange infections. That meant the apocalypse from the novel was starting, and it would be in full swing in less than a month. There wasn't much time left. The first thing she had to secure was food. Money wasn't an issue. She had enough wealth to last a lifetime. What she needed now were weapons. She knew just the person who could help. Howard Harrison, the Sinclair family's lawyer. Howard had taken care of all the family's affairs after her parents passed away. He had always been loyal, almost like the older brother she never had. When Cherry visited him and asked for weapons, he was shocked. "Why do you need weapons?" he asked, frowning. "Self-defense," Cherry said simply. Howard didn't believe her. He wanted details. Why? How? For what purpose? Cherry didn't want to involve him too much, but she knew she had to say something convincing. So, she told him she needed them to get revenge on a man who had hurt her. The moment she said that, Howard's expression darkened. He demanded to know who this man was. Seeing his reaction, Cherry realized she had to be more careful. Howard was too protective. He'd always dig deeper if he thought she was in danger. So, she changed her approach. She acted like a heartbroken noblewoman. That seemed to work. Howard promised to look into it and said he would take care of the man himself. Then, he asked what kind of weapons she needed. "Swords, bows, axes, anything you can find," Cherry replied. Howard insisted on finding someone to train her in using them. Cherry didn't have time for lessons, but she agreed, knowing he wouldn't give up otherwise. Before he left, she asked one more thing: to build a weapons workshop. "Where do you want it?" he asked. "In a town called Brunel," Cherry said, smiling. Howard had never heard of it, but Cherry had. In the book, Brunel was mentioned several times. It had a stronghold on the edge of the town, a mansion surrounded by mountains, with a large garden that could grow food. It was the perfect place to hide when the world began to fall apart. Cherry remembered that one of the male leads in the book would eventually create a vaccine, but it wouldn't happen for another 2 years. She knew Howard wouldn't live that long if she didn't protect him. He was the only real family she had left. So, she decided to tell him the truth, or at least part of it. She explained there would be a disease that turned people into monsters. She said she wanted to go to Brunel to prepare for what was coming. Howard listened carefully, but when she finished, he looked confused. "Are you sure you want to stop taking your medicine?" he asked gently. "If you don't like your current doctor, I can find a better one." Cherry realized he thought she was making it all up, maybe grieving or imagining things. So, she smiled and said it was just a vivid dream. She changed the subject quickly, asking Howard to come with her to Brunel. He refused at first, saying he would send a specialist instead. But Cherry insisted. Only Howard could help her with all the planning and resources she needed. At last, he agreed to go. With that settled, Cherry went to the bank to withdraw a large amount of money, 100 million gold. The manager looked at her in shock. "Are you sure you want to withdraw that much?" he asked. Cherry nodded. "I probably won't get the chance to spend it later," she thought to herself. The manager hesitated. "Forgive me, Lady Sinclair, but I need to ask, why do you need so much money?" Cherry gave a small smile. To prepare for the end of the world. She was telling the truth, but he didn't believe her. He looked worried, probably thinking she was being threatened. "I promise I'm fine," Cherry said, guessing he thought it had something to do with gambling debts. He mentioned rumors that she'd lost diamond mines at the casino. Cherry rolled her eyes and told him she needed the money for a business expansion overseas. That seemed to make more sense to him, especially since the Sinclair family owned many trading companies. The truth was, her casino wasn't just a place for rich people to waste their money, it was a goldmine for gathering information and building connections. But she didn't tell him that. When the manager guessed she needed the money for a new building, she told him she planned to sell the casino. She started getting annoyed. "Why so many questions?" she asked sharply. "Do you think I'm not serious?" The man quickly apologized and promised to have the money prepared right away. Moments later, the girl spotted several men loading a vast sum, 100 million gold coins, into a chest. Watching them, she couldn't help but smirk. It felt like she was swindling a bank. She knew a deadly virus would soon spread across the world, rendering currency practically useless. So, She needed to use the money wisely and swiftly to prepare for the chaos ahead. While flipping through a newspaper, her attention was caught by a familiar article. The bank manager noticed her interest and allowed her to take it. As she read, memories from a novel she had once read resurfaced. It was the night monsters were first mentioned, a pivotal moment in the story where Aurora, the heroine, faced a terrifying creature for the first time. Aurora had been adopted by the powerful Lancaster family. One night, she received a letter from someone claiming to know her origins. Following its instructions, she found herself in a dark, abandoned building, where a starving monster awaited. There, she also stumbled upon an herb called aloes, a crucial plant known to neutralize the infection caused by monster bites. Strangely, the herb only grew in that exact place, and no one knew why. Determined not to repeat Aurora's mistake, the pink-haired girl, Cherry, set out to retrieve aloes before heading to Brunel. She waited until nightfall, fully aware that entering the mansion could mean facing a monster. Until then, monsters were only things she'd read about. Now, she might meet one face to face. Prepared, Cherry armed herself with an axe and a Molotov cocktail. She reminded herself that monsters had poor vision, relying on sound instead, and were vulnerable to heat and fire. Her plan was to confuse any attacker with flames, then strike. Just as she approached the mansion, she heard a scream. Expecting a monster, she rushed toward the sound, only to find a silver-haired girl who had simply tripped over her cloak. Upon seeing her amethyst eyes and recognizing the letter in her hand, Cherry realized this was Aurora Lancaster, the heroine of the novel. Aurora stood nervously at the gate of the building. Cherry guessed she might be trying to pick the lock, awkwardly but endearingly. Though she initially thought to wait for Aurora to deal with the monster, Cherry decided she couldn't risk it and sneaked inside alone to get the herb before panic set in. Inside, the silence was eerie. Cherry moved quietly, knowing the infected creature had been inside for days. When a small noise startled her, she turned to find it was only a fallen box. Inside, she discovered the very herb she had come for, aloes, with a strange engraving confirming its identity. Just as she prepared to leave, a trembling man appeared, asking for help. Confused, since no one else should have been there according to the story, Cherry questioned him. That's when they saw the monster clinging to the ceiling. The man claimed the creature had been tied up in another room and hadn't bitten him. As he nervously rambled about his estranged sister, the monster suddenly attacked. Cherry dodged, trying to make sense of how the beast had gotten free. Meanwhile, the man bolted, and Cherry thought he made the right choice. He was only a hindrance anyway. Back outside, Aurora finally managed to open the gate. As she hesitated, the man from earlier sprinted past, shouting about a monster. Aurora stared in disbelief before approaching the house. Suddenly, a burning hand shot out, terrifying her. She collapsed in fear, unable to move as the heat overwhelmed her. At that moment, Cherry dashed out and pulled Aurora to safety. Overwhelmed with emotion, Aurora thanked her repeatedly. Cherry, hiding her face, asked if Aurora had seen the man leave. When she confirmed she had, Cherry felt a wave of relief. Despite everything, Cherry had managed to retrieve the herb, defeat the monster, and avoid injury. But a crowd had formed, and as she tried to slip away, a policeman approached. Shining a flashlight at them, he was surprised to recognize one of the girls. Aurora's brother, Eden Duncan Lancaster, demanded to know what she was doing there. Cherry immediately realized the danger. If Eden identified her, she'd be dragged to the station for questioning, something she couldn't afford. Thankfully, Eden was called to the scene inside, giving Cherry a temporary reprieve. Eden was stunned to learn that such a fragile girl had defeated the monster. When he turned to question her, Cherry bolted. Aurora wanted to know her rescuer's name, but Cherry insisted on remaining anonymous. To her surprise, Eden chased after her. Despite her efforts to escape, he caught up quickly. While he expressed gratitude for saving his sister, he also treated her like a suspect. Cherry grew frustrated. She had only run because he'd demanded she remove her mask and reveal her identity. Before he could drag her away, Aurora screamed again, giving Cherry the chance to escape his grip. Eden was furious but forced to return to his sister's side. As Cherry fled, she noticed something chilling. Eden had found and picked up her brooch, the last gift from her late father. Panicking, she hoped he wouldn't realize it was hers. The initials were hidden, after all. Later, Eden sent a maid to request a private meeting with Cherry, but she told her maid, Suzanne, to say she had already left on a journey. Suzanne, loyal as ever, had already packed their bags and was ready to go to Brunel. Cherry considered herself lucky to have someone like Suzanne, who was willing to follow her without question. As she read the newspaper the next day, she found a brief article about a mysterious incident in the capital. It mentioned Lady Lancaster but made no reference to monsters. Cherry suspected a cover-up. Elsewhere, Eden read the same paper. Despite being surrounded by admirers, his focus was on the story, and the brooch in his hand. His superior warned him not to get involved with the Sinclair family, but Eden insisted he was simply doing his duty. Though his noble blood could have secured him a high rank, Eden had chosen the police force to serve with purpose. Still, his interest in the case raised eyebrows. When he pointed out the suspicious lack of monster references in the paper, his boss admitted that the higher-ups had ordered the press to stay silent to avoid public panic. Eden wasn't satisfied. He followed up on another lead, a shipment of weapons from a neighboring kingdom, and assigned the inspector to the new case, determined to get answers. Meanwhile, Cherry arrived in Brunel. It had taken 4 transfers, but she managed to cut through the mountains and reach the village. She explored her new surroundings, relieved to see it was just as peaceful, and equipped, as she hoped. It had a store, a clinic, a vegetable stall, and even a weapons shop. As she walked through the quaint village, curious locals watched her, clearly not used to visitors from the capital. Cherry found her temporary home, an eerie mansion perched on a hill. Seeing it in person, she finally understood how it could have survived so long in the novel. The mansion had a strategic location, a city lay in front of it, and the foothills began just behind. Cherry Sinclair, unaware that Vanilla had already purchased the property, was initially surprised when her employer mentioned the house. Determined, she resolved to negotiate directly with Vanilla. While Cherry waited for the elusive Vanilla, Eden Duncan Lancaster was deep into an investigation concerning an illegal arms deal. The suspect had been apprehended and was now being questioned about the covert purchase of weapons in the Kingdom of Gren. The man had been caught red-handed, striking a deal with an arms dealer from the neighboring kingdom of Brightwood. Eden was incensed that the suspect dared to feign innocence, especially since he'd personally witnessed the exchange of contraband. The man's attempt to flee only made things more suspicious. The suspect had mentioned the weapons were bound for a small, unremarkable town, a detail that piqued Eden's interest. He strongly suspected Howard Harrison's involvement and confronted the man, asserting that he already knew the identity of the buyer. Eden revealed he was aware that the purchase had been made under Cherry Sinclair's name, an odd move, considering Cherry's reputation for indulgence and extravagance. While he claimed to Inspector Marcel that his suspicions came from a tip, Eden had, in truth, witnessed Harrison meeting with Jose, a notorious black market arms broker from Brightwood, in secret. Cherry, known more for luxury than subterfuge, had recently withdrawn an enormous sum, 100 million gold coins, and mysteriously vanished. Her destination, a remote town called Brunel, so small it didn't even have a train station. Eden questioned why someone like Cherry would abandon her lavish life to retreat into obscurity. He believed she was up to something, perhaps orchestrating the arms deal herself. Meanwhile, Cherry was oblivious to the fact that Aurora's brother was plotting against her. She skimmed through a tabloid article speculating whether she had been kidnapped or fled abroad. She didn't mind the gossip. If the world was ending, who had time for scandal columns? She suspected Harrison knew about her fortune's disappearance but assumed he'd argue and then, as always, forgive her. Still waiting for Vanilla, Cherry spotted a striking officer across the street, golden-haired and impeccably dressed in full uniform. His features were so refined, his hair like threads of sunlight. When he noticed her watching, he turned, and to her surprise, it was Eden Duncan Lancaster. He walked over with a courteous smile and requested to sit at her table, citing the lack of free seats. Caught off guard, Cherry asked him to repeat himself, her mind scrambling for composure. Eden, unfazed, smiled again and reiterated his request. Though she meant to feign indifference, his charisma disarmed her, and she agreed. She masked her unease with calm, unsure of his true intent, especially if he brought up the monster incident. Eden broke the silence by saying he had hoped to meet her, but didn't expect to find her there. When Cherry asked how he recognized her, he remarked that she'd become quite the media sensation. She realized then that he was probing her. Before she could react, Eden formally introduced himself, a Benton police officer from the famed Lancaster family, known for his relentless pursuit of justice. Cherry pretended to be delighted, even mentioning how often his name appeared in the papers. Eden quipped that his fame was nothing compared to Lady Sinclair's. Curious about her presence in such a secluded area, he asked her purpose. Cherry claimed she was there to purchase a countryside retreat. Eden replied that he'd been assigned to the town, prompting her to express skepticism, a Lancaster posted to a backwater village. Their exchange was interrupted by a blue-haired woman who approached and politely asked who intended to buy the mansion on the hill. Cherry raised her hand, and internally thanked Vanilla for showing up before Eden could press further. Vanilla handed over the key, her demeanor cold despite her warm-sounding name, a stark contrast that Cherry found oddly amusing. As they reviewed the purchase agreement, another officer approached and loudly inquired why someone from the Sinclair family would want such a derelict property. Cherry quickly shushed him, not wanting to reveal her identity. Vanilla, ever the pragmatist, cut in, stating she didn't care who bought the house, as long as the money was good. Cherry was relieved. Vanilla's capitalist mindset made her predictable. Eden then asked the blue-haired girl about the weapon strapped to her belt. The woman, a local hunter, explained she sold birds to the village chief for a good profit. Though the novel never mentioned it, Cherry admired Vanilla's ability to survive 6 months in the mansion, crediting both the structure and her survival skills. She even considered hiring the hunter for protection. Vanilla warned Cherry that if she hadn't paid in full, she would have advised against the purchase. She also mentioned she'd only be in town briefly, and any future help would come at a price, Sinclair or not. Cherry asked if there were secret rooms or escape routes in the mansion, but Vanilla said she remembered nothing special. That puzzled Cherry, who had assumed the house's self-sufficiency referred to more than just its location. Later, Cherry noticed Eden was still lingering nearby. That raised red flags. According to the novel's timeline, he should have been in the capital with Aurora when the apocalypse started. The only explanation that made sense was that he'd discovered the brooch belonged to her. Cherry felt a wave of anxiety. If he connected her to the weapon request, she'd be in serious legal trouble. When she asked why he was following her, Eden claimed concern for her safety. The area was remote and dangerous. He also casually mentioned the mansion's ideal setup for storing illicit weapons or funds. That comment chilled her. Had he overheard her conversation with Harrison about acquiring a gun and getting trained? She deflected, saying it was improper for an unmarried woman to have a strange man visit her home. Without an official warrant, she argued, he had no right to enter. She accused him of being shameless and sent him away. Alone at last, Cherry explored her new home. Though massive and sturdy, it was clearly neglected. She named it Cherry's Happy House, unaware it would one day become a historic landmark. Had she known the apocalypse was truly coming, she might have picked a less ironic name. Surveying the grounds, she found a fountain at the entrance and a garden large enough to cultivate food. With the cure at least 2 years away, the estate needed to be completely self-sufficient. Vanilla was right. The land was viable for farming, and nearby stood a warehouse-like structure that could be repurposed. But something strange caught Cherry's eye, a faint inscription on the floor plan, referencing both Brunel and a street in the capital named Notion. She decided to ask Vanilla about it later. Finding a potential bedroom, she discovered it had a fireplace, perfect for cozy winters. But her excitement vanished when she peered inside and spotted charred clothing and what appeared to be bones. Panic rose in her chest, but after careful inspection, she realized it was just chalk, not human remains. Still, the burned clothes unsettled her. Though unnerved, Cherry reminded herself that this was her new home and began cleaning. Hours later, she collapsed from exhaustion, realizing she couldn't manage it all alone. Since the townspeople didn't know her true identity, she considered asking them for help. But first, she tried to contact Harrison, only to find all phones were dead. She sent a letter instead. As she pondered the village's eerie lack of communication, a little girl approached, offering a flower and asking her to buy a newspaper. Touched, Cherry handed her a gold coin and took the paper, bracing herself for whatever the next headline might bring. Cherry decided to take a break and catch up on the news. To her surprise, people were still gossiping about her. Rather than indulge their rumors, she skipped the article about herself and stumbled upon something more intriguing, a piece about the legendary Seagrave family. The Seagrave clan had always been cloaked in myth, almost too heroic to be real. Cherry sighed, wishing such noble figures truly existed. In her imagination, they were the type of people who could save the world from ruin and give humanity hope. As she silently argued to herself that the Seagraves would have defeated the virus without question, a familiar voice broke her thoughts. "Do you really believe in children's fairy tales?" The blonde man beside her asked dryly. Annoyed, Cherry shot him a glare. "What are you doing here?" "I'm investigating," he replied smoothly. Cherry opened her mouth to argue, but a timely distraction appeared. Vanilla approached their table, holding a glass of orange juice. Cherry brightened. "Miss Laskin, what brings you here?" Vanilla lied without hesitation, claiming she worked part-time at the cafe. Cherry frowned. That didn't add up. Vanilla came from an aristocratic family. Why would she need such work? The blue-haired girl lingered by their table, and Cherry realized she was silently demanding a tip again. Observing her, Cherry once more questioned everything she'd assumed about Vanilla. Nothing about her matched the image Cherry had formed in her mind. To change the subject, Cherry asked about a peculiar inscription she had seen on the mansion's floor plan. When she finally got Vanilla's attention, she showed her the document. As the mansion's former owner, Vanilla might know what the mysterious names meant. Cherry had already figured out that Brunel was the town they were in, and Notion was a street in the capital. But Hagu and Samel remained a mystery. Vanilla admitted she had no idea either. She had inherited the mansion from her late father. It seemed the information had been passed on to Cherry indirectly, after the elder Laskin's death during the apocalypse. Cherry felt a pang of disappointment. The lack of knowledge might complicate her survival in the coming crisis. Vanilla suggested the notations might refer to properties owned by her family. She mentioned that her family also held an estate on Notion Street. Surprisingly, the blonde officer confirmed this, adding that Hagu was the name of a street near the train station in Westmore. Both girls glared at him, realizing he had been eavesdropping the entire time. When Cherry learned that Vanilla also owned a mansion in Westmore, she immediately asked about the numbers on the plan. But Vanilla looked blank. She was clueless, like a student called to the board unprepared. Cherry decided to give her a break and change the subject. Instead, she asked if there were any strong laborers in town who could help clean the mansion. She explained that she had heaps of old junk to get rid of and needed discreet help. The blonde officer silently observed her the whole time. When Vanilla returned to work, Cherry felt some of the tension lift. Maybe the floor plan was just a list of properties after all. If so, there was no need to obsess over it. Deep in thought, Cherry was caught off guard when the young officer handed her another newspaper. He explained he was continuing his investigation. Miss Sinclair was far too unpredictable to ignore. The article he handed her was one she'd seen before. It ridiculed her for being the worst cricketer of all time. He pointed out that she had played at the cricket club for quite a while and clearly had some skill. Cherry rolled her eyes and told him to read the article again. It said plainly she was terrible. What he didn't know was that she had only been accepted into the club because her parents secretly paid a hefty donation. At the time, young Cherry believed she'd made it in on merit. She added that all the club ever wanted from her was her name, a famous one, like everything else in her life. By now, that no longer surprised her. Still, she confessed it stung a little to know she didn't have the strength or independence she had now. Seeing the officer look a bit guilty, Cherry leaned in with a pitiful expression and said she wasn't upset anymore, just misunderstood. Then she stood, said she had a lot to do, and left. Cherry was clever enough to know that manipulating this particular officer wouldn't be easy, but she still hoped to lower his suspicion. At the top of her mind, though, was Harrison. He still hadn't contacted her. When Cherry heard that the phone at Kent Station had finally been repaired, she rushed there. The station was old but tidy, and more importantly, it had a working phone. She dialed the Sinclair residence. Her personal maid, Suzanne, answered. Cherry was relieved. Suzanne explained that she'd planned to arrive that day but had to delay. The head maid had fallen ill, and Suzanne had to cover for her. Cherry told her to come tomorrow instead. She couldn't do without her much longer. Suzanne mentioned she'd already bought a train ticket and would likely arrive by the afternoon. Then, speaking gently, she said the house felt empty since Cherry left, though it had always been that way. Suzanne hadn't worked for the family long and didn't know that Cherry's parents were constantly traveling for business. Cherry had been energetic and social, but the estate itself had always felt more like a silent shell. That memory made Cherry suddenly think of Harrison again. She asked Suzanne to call him to the phone, but he wasn't home. Worse, Suzanne revealed that Cherry's letters hadn't reached him. She mentioned the disturbing reports about postmen recently. Some had gone missing, others had turned up dead, mutilated by what authorities suspected was a maniac. The world was spinning into chaos. Suzanne urged Cherry to be careful. Though things still seemed calm in Brunel, everyone knew that would change soon. Cherry knew it too. That's why she decided to stay focused. She could only rely on herself now. Meanwhile, the officer investigating her was poring over old documents, digging into the history of Westmore, a town Cherry had casually mentioned. A year ago, reports from Westmore described nightly screams coming from an abandoned mansion. Animal-like howls followed the cries. 10 police calls had been made, coinciding with 10 disappearances. But no evidence was ever found. With no bodies and no crime scene, the case was dismissed as a ghost story. The officer found the whole thing eerily similar to an incident on the Rue Nodin. He glanced at the brooch Aurora once called the symbol of her savior, and noted the engraved initials. They matched the name, Cherry Sinclair. To him, Cherry was nothing but tabloid fodder, a wealthy girl who threw wild parties and stirred up scandal. He found her self-indulgent and selfish, and in no way comparable to the mysterious heroine who had saved his sister. But then he recalled Cherry's expression during their last conversation, when she said that all anyone saw was her name, never the real her. He couldn't help but wonder, was there more to Cherry Sinclair than he thought? The next day, when the young man went outside, he overheard 2 women talking about Sinclair. They were discussing how the famous girl from the abandoned mansion in their village was doing something strange again. The young man, who had previously felt remorse, changed his mind and decided that the pink-haired girl might be mentally ill. Noticing their gaze on her, Cherry Sinclair turned around and asked if they had been out for a walk. The women smiled and greeted her in return. They asked where she was taking all the scarecrows, and she replied, beaming, that she needed them for practice. When Cherry added with a grin that she would practice cutting off heads, the women looked alarmed. Laughing awkwardly, she explained that it was just a joke. She claimed there were too many sparrows on her property, so she needed scarecrows to chase them off. As she left, the villagers whispered among themselves, puzzled by her behavior. None would have guessed that in high society, Cherry was called a fragile flower. The women speculated on her wealth, noting how much she spent despite living in a derelict mansion. A policeman who had been eavesdropping asked if Cherry often came to town. They replied eagerly, admiring him, and mentioned how she had bought out the grocery store and emptied the department store. They theorized she was preparing for war. The villagers then shifted their attention to Eden, the young policeman, speculating that he must be in love with Cherry. Considering her beauty and apparent wealth, this conclusion made sense to them. One woman even suggested that Eden and Cherry would make a good couple. When the young man tried to deny their assumptions, the town inspector arrived. Asked where he'd been, he explained he had checked the abandoned house due to recent hunter activity. Eden decided to continue his investigation, but others assumed he was rushing to see his beloved. Meanwhile, Cherry had hired hunters sent by Vanilla to clean and repair the mansion. They worked efficiently and without questions. Cherry instructed them to reinforce the walls and install torch holders to deter monsters with light and fire. She replaced the gate with a stone one that couldn't be broken from the outside. Everything was going according to plan, but she found the clothes tasteless. Her next task was to plant the house herb. Then things took a turn. Eden, suspicious, thought Cherry was growing drugs and brought her to the station. She vehemently denied it, but he insisted, claiming a fertilizer seller found her creepy. Though she understood he was obligated to investigate, Cherry saw it as an excuse to arrest her. She asked Eden what he really wanted, and he said cooperation. He assured her an expert would arrive soon to verify the plant. A crowd gathered, and rumors spread quickly. Cherry worried everyone would think she was insane. Then, a man arrived, introducing himself as a consultant. Cherry froze in shock. She recognized Knox Carwell, second love interest of the novel's protagonist and brother of Harrison's late wife. He was from the renowned Ludfour family, famous for revolutionizing medicine with anesthesia. Knox, an obstetrics expert and volunteer doctor, confirmed that the plant was not a drug but elpinus, a restorative herb. Onlookers gossiped about his fame, even greater than Cherry's. Eden, silently observing, held a higher status than Knox, but no one knew. When Eden and Cherry were alone, he apologized sincerely. She was surprised by his humility. She joked that he owed her help as an apology, and Eden agreed. She brought him to her estate, where he assumed she wanted help planting a vegetable garden. She clarified it was more complex. He had cost her time, and now she was short on workers. She threatened to involve a journalist if he refused. Eden, acknowledging his mistake, agreed. As they discussed his duties, Knox approached, sarcastically commenting on being ignored. Cherry, realizing she had forgotten him, apologized. Knox asked for a few minutes of her time. When she asked Eden's opinion, he gestured for her to decide. She agreed to speak with Knox and led him to the mansion. Knox was intrigued by Cherry and the rumors about her inheritance. He had seen her cut a monster in half and knew about her actions during the explosion at the mansion. As he looked around, he asked if she truly lived there. She teased him, warning not to ask too many questions unless he wanted to leave in pieces. Knox promised discretion and asked what she hoped to achieve. He was curious why she hid in such a remote place. When he said he liked girls who didn't speak needlessly, Cherry found him strange. Still, she was tempted to confide in someone at last. Knox's words caught her off guard. The young man quickly explained that he was only joking, and the girl let out a relieved sigh, realizing he wasn't going to leave her alone so easily. She replied that growing grass had become her new hobby. Sinclair said she had a lot of money and nothing better to do, so she started looking for ways to avoid dying of boredom. The main character had made the story up on the spot, but she was satisfied with her answer. It sounded believable enough. Unfortunately, Knox didn't buy it. He admitted that the girl always surprised him with her strange answers. The pink-haired girl couldn't understand what exactly he found so funny. She assumed aristocrats didn't like it when people openly talked about their wealth. Their conversation was interrupted by a blonde man, who seemed irritated as he asked what they were talking about so enthusiastically. Looking at the young man she had almost forgotten was still there, the girl felt like these two might soon drive her mad. She couldn't understand how both of them had ended up in her house and demanded an explanation. The brunette glanced at the policeman and told the girl it was hard to speak freely while he was around. Knox even suggested she ask him to leave. Eden, suspicious of Knox's intentions, said it was inappropriate to speak that way to a girl he wasn't close with. The pink-haired girl realized she was probably the one acting improperly by inviting both men into her house when she lived alone. She remembered how these two didn't get along from the start. Even in the NOLA, it was clear. Knox, being from a noble family, valued elegance and tradition. To him, Eden, who had cast aside his noble title, was an eyesore. Because of this, Knox constantly provoked Eden, and Eden, unable to ignore the jabs, always fought back. Realizing their relationship wouldn't improve anytime soon, the girl asked the blonde to stop arguing and let her speak to Knox privately. When Eden tried to protest, she firmly told him to stop. She didn't want any more fights in her home. To her surprise, he quickly gave in and left the room. She suddenly felt sorry for him. Meanwhile, the dark-haired man thanked her for agreeing to talk. As they sat down, he asked what she knew about the elpinus herb. Cherry couldn't understand why he was so interested, but she suspected he had some idea in mind. Looking him in the eye, she admitted that she didn't know much and had simply stumbled upon the plant by accident. He remained silent, and Cherry started to regret sending Eden away. Despite his suspicions, Eden didn't pressure her the way Knox did. She even thought that if things got worse, she could always fall back on an old-fashioned fistfight, not something she could do with a cop like Eden, but Knox was a different story. Noticing her tension, Knox reassured her. Unlike Lancaster, he found her very interesting. Cherry replied that he was acting strangely since the beginning, treating her kindly for no clear reason. When he offered to help, saying he didn't yet understand her true intentions, she turned him down. But he challenged her on that, saying he knew she planned to grow alpinus grass in her garden. He explained that he overheard the workers saying she was preparing a large plot for medicinal plants. Cherry nodded, saying she planned to fertilize the soil and plant the grass alongside other herbs. After a pause, Knox told her that Alennes wasn't a typical plant, it couldn't be grown that easily. She was confused. As far as she knew, it was just a medicinal herb and should grow in regular soil. But Knox said alpinus was unique. It fed on insects. Specifically, its roots absorbed nutrients from bugs like spiders and centipedes. Cherry was horrified at the thought. The idea of eating a plant that fed on creepy crawlies made her feel sick. Her reaction amused Knox. When she asked how to grow it, he explained that when planting it, she had to bury a few dead insects nearby and water them well. If done regularly, the herb would thrive. Though Cherry didn't like the idea of handling dead bugs, she had no other choice. After sharing everything he knew, Knox smiled and asked again if she was sure she didn't need help. Puffing out her cheeks, she asked how he could possibly help her. He offered to bury the insects himself. He also said he could teach her the basics of medicine. Cherry found the offer too tempting to pass up. She realized she would benefit the most from this deal and asked why he was so eager to help. Knox replied that her projects genuinely interested him. She found that reason believable and decided not to refuse his help. She reached out her hand and told him she would rely on him from now on. After all, his skills were impressive. He smiled and told her she could count on him because he was, indeed, extremely talented. Feeling content with the deal, Cherry left the mansion, thinking everything had gone well. She had feared the conversation might go badly, but Knox had eased her worries. When she looked around, she spotted Eden, who had just finished chopping wood. He was no longer wearing his police uniform, and Cherry's eyes lingered on him longer than she expected. Noticing her gaze, Eden asked how her talk with Knox went. He joked that he could hear their laughter from across the yard. Cherry didn't respond to his teasing. Her thoughts were still focused on his surprisingly handsome appearance. Realizing she was admiring Eden, the girl shook it off and asked what he wanted. He said he had remembered her request to chop firewood and had already finished the job. Cherry praised him, admitting she had meant to do it herself but got distracted. Eden asked again about her talk with Knox, curious about the doctor's involvement. Cherry explained that they talked about the alpinus herb, and that Knox had offered to help her grow it. She mentioned that starting tomorrow, the doctor would be visiting regularly, which clearly surprised Eden. As she looked at the chopped wood, Eden casually mentioned that he would also be visiting tomorrow. Cherry raised her eyebrows and asked why. With a mock-offended look, he reminded her that she had asked for help with her chores. The way he looked at her made her heart race, and she awkwardly explained that she thought he'd only help for the day. Agreeing to see him tomorrow, she went back inside to clean. The work felt endless, especially in a house as big as this. As she worked, she remembered other tasks outside and sent the workers to build a wall. Watching them work, she recalled that she had promised them a bonus for fast progress. Seeing the minor characters of the story working for her pleased her. She felt proud of her clever use of resources and labor. Leaning out the window, she asked Eden how the work was going. He replied that it would be done soon. She told him she'd take some firewood into the house and store the rest under the canopy. Eden looked suspicious and asked why she needed so much. It was enough to burn down a whole city. Cherry just laughed and said he was exaggerating. Changing the subject, she said she had a lot to do and had to leave. Eden didn't argue and simply watched as she walked deeper into the mansion. While cleaning, Cherry thought about how Eden seemed to search for hidden crimes even when doing chores. But she figured it didn't matter. He had no real reason to be suspicious of her anyway. As she thought about how best to prepare for the apocalypse, a strange noise came from one of the rooms. She clearly remembered closing that door earlier, but now it was slightly open. Cautiously, she went inside the room where old children's things were kept. Finding nothing, she assumed it was just a draft and turned to leave. Just then, she heard another noise that made her freeze. She turned around again but saw nothing, thinking it was just the wind rocking the chair. She sighed in relief, though she had been scared for a moment, almost like her story was turning into a horror novel. While continuing to clean the mansion, Cherry noticed signs that many people had lived there before. It even seemed like they had left recently. The rocking chair looked almost new. She examined it closely and discovered an engraving, the name, Seagrave. At first, she thought it was important, but then she remembered, it was the surname of legendary heroes and defenders. A blond man chopping wood nearby called out to her, saying he was almost done. He was the older brother of the main character and noticed Cherry carrying something on her shoulder. Curious, he asked what it was. Ignoring his puzzled expression, Cherry explained that she had taken some things from the children's room on the second floor. Watching her closely, the man admitted that he was becoming more and more curious about her plans for the mansion. Tired of his constant questions, Cherry reminded him that she was restoring the mansion simply to keep boredom at bay. Just then, a builder standing behind her accidentally dropped some equipment. Everything could have ended badly, but the blond man quickly noticed the danger. He reached out, pulling Cherry toward him just in time to save her from serious injury. Still pressed against him, Cherry was too shocked to process what had just happened. It all happened so fast. The builders started fussing over the fallen materials, making sure nothing was damaged. Meanwhile, Cherry couldn't help but think the story had finally turned into a romance novel. Some builders began blaming her for not watching where she was going. The blonde looked like he was about to snap at them, but then remembered Cherry was still in his arms. Not wanting to upset her, he calmly told the workers that they were at fault, and reminded them how dangerous their carelessness could have been. It was the first time Cherry had seen him so angry. She thanked him quietly, and he brushed it off, asking if she was okay. At that moment, Cherry realized she wanted to spend more time with this man, not just because he was attractive and strong, but because he was genuinely helpful and dependable. According to the novel, he was a person she could trust. The blonde, unaware of her thoughts, dusted off his pants and said he would return to chopping wood. Cherry was about to respond when a familiar voice interrupted. It was the doctor, who laughed and called the blonde a Tin Woodman, making fun of him. Cherry immediately remembered why Eden wanted to fight this doctor so often. He had a talent for annoying people. When the blonde told the doctor to go away, the doctor scolded him, reminding him to be polite in front of a lady. He turned to Cherry, likely hoping she'd back him up, but she dodged the situation and asked if he'd caught any bugs yet. The doctor's silence gave her the answer, he hadn't. So, Cherry declared that he should leave. Offended, the man insisted he was a man of his word and immediately went to look for insects. Cherry sighed, thinking how ironic it was that she wanted a secret hideout, but more and more people were showing up each day. The blonde, still nearby, told her not to let her guard down. With construction happening all around, accidents could happen again. Cherry didn't know what was going on in his head. How could the same man who once suspected her of a crime now be so protective? Noticing her silence, he gently asked if she wasn't used to hearing such words. Cherry replied that Harrison and Suzanne, who truly loved her, used to say things like that all the time. Thinking of them, she realized how much she missed them and hoped they were on their way to see her. Elsewhere, Harrison did look exhausted. He was running errands for Cherry. The letter she had sent was urgent, but delivering it before the police got involved wasn't easy, especially since the postman had been killed. In her letter, Cherry hoped that the weapon Harrison was delivering was legal, and not a firearm. Sadly, Harrison misunderstood her and assumed she wanted a gun. As he read further, he realized she had already guessed what he had done, and requested that he deliver it himself instead of using a courier. She also warned him that Eden Duncan Lancaster had started following her and was likely assigned to Brunel's police station. Harrison figured Eden had found out about the illegal weapons and suspected he was acting on Cherry's orders. That's why he had followed her to Brunel. Harrison didn't care if Eden spied on him, but Cherry was different. She was family, and he couldn't let her be put at risk. He first met Cherry when he was studying at the Imperial Boarding Academy. One day, the Sinclair family reached out and offered to support him. Nervous but respectful, Harrison greeted them and thanked them for their generosity. The head of the family quickly corrected his formality and told him he was now Cherry's big brother. Back then, Cherry was a shy little girl who said she had always dreamed of having an older brother. Her words were innocent, but they touched Harrison deeply. That moment, he promised to always protect her, even though they weren't related by blood. Their peaceful life came to an end when the Sinclairs died in a car crash. Cherry was left all alone, and she changed completely. Even though she tried to drown her grief in parties and distractions, Harrison stayed by her side. Seeing her smile was all the thanks he needed. Eventually, she found a new purpose in life, and from then on, she kept him busy with all kinds of tasks. She had a new drive in her eyes, and Harrison had no choice but to support her plans. That's why, when she asked him to personally deliver the weapons, he made sure to take every precaution. He also wondered where the man he had sent to teach Cherry had gone. Meanwhile, His Highness, Crown Prince Theodore Gren, was reading the latest newspaper headlines. His assistant tried to get his attention, but the prince ignored him. When the assistant called more insistently, the blonde prince finally looked up. The assistant had come to report on an investigation the prince had ordered. Theodore Gren, the first heir to the Gren kingdom, was admired for both his charm and skill in diplomacy. With a growing number of supporters, including the assistant, Alderson, he was a key player in the kingdom. Alderson revealed that Sir Eden had been transferred to the Brunel police station, and Sir Knox had also traveled there. Both men in one town. It couldn't be a coincidence. The Crown Prince, known for his sharp instincts, suspected there was more to the story. He instructed Alderson to keep digging. The assistant hesitated and asked why the prince was so interested in these two men. Sir Knox belonged to the prestigious Lafortre family, which had ties to Prince Lloyd's territory. Sir Eden was part of the Lancaster clan. Not long ago, a strange illness had broken out in the lands owned by the Duke of Casey, a vassal of the Lancasters, and the incident was mysteriously covered up. Prince Lloyd, the second prince, was gaining more power, and Theodore needed to rally loyal allies like Eden to his side. Although Eden was nothing like his father, the Duke of Lancaster, he was hot-headed and impulsive, he was still a good man. Ignoring Alderson's doubts, the prince stated that he had to understand why Knox and Eden had both gone to Brunel. He knew his friends well, and they wouldn't go there without a solid reason. While the prince was deep in thought, back in Brunel, the townspeople admired Cherry for her strength and independence. She enjoyed the sunshine and attention of the locals, completely unaware that the Crown Prince, one of the novel's most important characters, had taken a sudden interest in the quiet little town she now called home.